Hey guys, what's up? Theo here, and welcome to this video. We're going to try and learn the gist of React, going off of the docs here, off of these different quick starts and advanced guides. I'm not going to go into the reference so much, but we'll go back into, again, advanced guides, quick start. I'm not going to go to installation. You can look at that, but basically I'm using Create React app for the setup, and we're going to start through this hello world and work our way down to here. Try and keep it about 30 minutes. If I go over, I might make a part 2. Basically just want to give you a 0 to 60 introduction here. So, going back, React is just a JavaScript library for building out UIs. It's component based. There's React Native, so you can actually build applications that are going to run as maybe native desktop applications or also mobile applications. It's very declarative, it's functional, and it's got a very minimal API. So again, you can look at this hello world example, and we'll sort of go over all of this stuff right here and look at how we can work with all this stuff. So without further ado, let's get started with our first hello world component. So if you look at Create React app, in this index file, it's just pulling an app. We'll go over the syntax, but we're going to do all of our coding in this file, app.js. So as you can see right now, it's got this class name of app, and we'll go over JSX, but the first thing is this hello world example. So I'm going to write this 2 ways and show you guys sort of the gist of how you can get one going. So the first way we're going to write it is we're going to write what's called a functional stateless component, and I'll explain this. Basically, this is just a function that receives some props and returns a UI. That's it. So we're just going to call it hello world. Just a function, receives some props, and I'll just put in props right here, and we're going to use the implicit return, and we're just going to say div, say hello world, right? And to actually render this out, I'm going to show you guys what it is really, and I'll explain this interpolation right here in 1 second. Basically, I can call this as a function, and if I watch it refresh, it's just hello world. Cool. And also, I can use the JSX way, or rather, what will be compiled to a function call with Babel. I can use this almost like a native DOM element or tag. I can say hello world, and I should get the same result. Here, I can also inspect the props, and we'll go over this. But let's look at that a little bit later. So the other way I can write this is I can use an ES6 class, and I can say hello world, and I need it to go ahead and extend the component, which is React.component, because that's the base class for it. And all it needs to do is have a render method for its UI signature, and this is just going to return the same thing. I'm going to wrap this in parens so that we can have multi-lines, and we avoid the automatic semicolon insertion. And I'm just going to say div here, div, and I'm just going to say hello world. And now if I render this, we should get the exact same thing. Cool. So that's your hello world example. I will leave this one back here again, props, and I'll just put it back, div, hello world, div, and I will go ahead and comment that out. Cool. Next up, I want to talk about JSX. JSX is just basically a sort of a style of writing JavaScript on top of it, in terms of it's just more syntactic sugar. So like I showed, this is actually just called down with React to, or just compiled down to a function call. But really, anything that we have inside of this method or any React components, we can use this sort of interpolation syntax, which is going to interpolate any sort of JavaScript that we might have. There you go. You can see we've interpolated that. We could interpolate, an alert, say hello world, right? Anything that we might have, any sort of piece of JavaScript code we can have that run right there. We can have extra function calls. We could create a function here that just says say hello, and I can wrap this up in here. And again, if I were to put say hello, then we can sort of see what's going to happen this time. It's not defined, and that's because, let me see, sorry, this does say hello. So we can sort of see we're not getting anything there, right? Because it's not anything but latch on to its name. in there, and it's not going to give me anything. But if we actually interpolate it or we run it, let me pull up my console right here. Cool. I can go ahead and run it. This does say hello, run that, and there we go. Also, if you don't have the dev tools, you should probably get them, and we can look in here in React. We have this app, and again, we have this hello world component. This is the React tab, and if we look over here, we've got body, root, app, hello world. So it's just compiled down to the actual UI of the component. Cool. So again, that's just JSX specific stuff. There's some specific things like class name. Because we're writing JavaScript, class is a keyword that is obviously reserved. So if we look at this, I don't know if we, yeah, see, it'll give us a warning because we're in development mode. It's an invalid DOM property, right? And it's invalid again because, you know, if we're writing, you know, class, again, you can see the syntax highlighting. It's part of a reserved keyword for JavaScript. Cool. That's sort of a pretty high level overview of JSX. I'm going to get rid of a few of these things and get rid of that real quick. Okay, so let me just write a comment here, and it's just syntactic sugar for writing more intuitive component like JavaScript. Let's say that's a good definition. So rendering elements, we went over this a little bit. Basically every component that we build, if it's a class-based component, it needs to have a render method, and the render method needs to return some UI, right? So again, we've sort of seen this syntax. It's just returning this. Ultimately, it needs to have an overarching parent because we have JSX and the way that the rendering works. We need to have one overarching div, so we can't have something like this. We can't have a div and then a div right here. If we look at what happens now, it's going to say adjacent JSX element is supposed to be wrapped in an enclosing tag because we need to ultimately have a parent, because as we'll look at, one of the props is children, so it doesn't work if we don't have a overarching parent. Okay, so let's look at that again, and so now that's good to go. Let me change this back to class name, and I'll just change this back to hello world. Okay, so we went over that, return UI overarching parent component, or fragment like we'll talk about. So what is a component? A component is basically just a sort of structure of our UI, something that is going to encapsulate a piece of functionality in our application. So say we have an application for a blog, right? We might have a comments component, which might have comment in it, right? Or we might have a users, or we might have a dashboard component, right? Which could have a profile in it, or stats inside of that, right? So we're sort of composing different pieces of functionality to create more modular and more reusable JavaScript code. So for modularity, and reusability within our application. Okay, so let's look at props. And what are props? So props, as we will look at up here in a second, props are attributes, or basically just data that we pass around or are passed to our React components on construction or on instance creation. So what that means is, going back up to this example, right? So we could create a comments component, and again, I'm just going to create a stateless, functional stateless, and again, this takes in some props. And what I want to do here, instead of returning right away, I just want to look at what are the props that, let me use interpolation, what are the props that my comment component is getting handed, and I'm going to interpolate right here, and I'm going to say props. Okay, and then if I go ahead and run this, I'm going to come back up here, I'm going to say, hey, I want a comments component, and I want to give it some data, right? So I just want to give it basically this array of comments, and it's just going to say 1, 2, 3, right? So it's not a big deal right there, it's very small. But if we look at what is being handed, let's look. Oh, sorry. So comments props. Hello world. Oh, sorry. I need to render this out real quick, and I'll just leave this in here for now. Yeah, let me actually. You know what I'll do? I will. I'm gonna give it just the comments component from now. Okay. Okay, comments, and we actually need to return something here, so we'll just return div, or we'll just return two divs, and we'll say comments component. Okay, so it's complaining because we're not returning anything. So props for components is an object. Let's just log out props right here, and let's look one more time. Okay, so we're getting basically just comments, right? So obviously there's nothing, there's no children or anything, but we could also nest children right here. So we can, that's the great thing about more of the composition and just composing different things together. We could, inside of this component, you know, we could have basically maybe a tracker component, whatever, but in here we'll just say div, we want to put in a tracker component or analytics, whatever. So now if we go back and render this out again, we're going to see we get comments, and let's see, might not get any children there. Let's look one more time. Yeah, it might not. Yeah, it might not be because of the functional stateless. Let's see, props dot children. Let me see. It might be hidden. Let's look. Undefined. Yeah. Comments. Yeah. But, you know, we could also, in that, if that's the case, we could add on a property of children, right? And our children basically is just going to be, it could just be this state or this UI right here. So now, again, this is how easy it is to add on. So let's look props, and let's look one more time. What are we getting? We are getting the comments and comments. Oh, sorry, my bad, guys. That's why we weren't saying it. Let me get rid of this real quick. Okay, so let's look one more time, and so we should see children. I don't know what I was talking about. And we'll just say div, we'll say tracking component goes here, right? And if we run this again now, we're going to see, hey, here we have some children. We got a React.element, and that it's props, it's children in that sense because it's under this div. Its tracking component goes here. So in this case, we could actually say, hey, we want to return props.children, and we're going to see tracking component goes here. Cool. But again, we could look at the props.comments one more time and see we're getting 1, 2, 3. We can't actually interpolate this out here. What we'll get if we try to interpolate it is, again, that overarching theme of we can't render out that array like that. There are a few ways to do that, but let me just show you guys what happens if we try to do this right here. So we'll get it there, but that's not really the structure of how we want to render it. We want to map over it and do some things with it. So maybe we could have we could create a little function here just called render comment. It takes in a comment and just returns div with this is the comment and now what we can do is go ahead and say props.comments.map, and we want to apply a function here for every element in that array, and I will just pass it I'll pass it render comment, and now let's look at what happens here. So sorry, this dot render comment and render comment. Oh, sorry, constructor comment. Okay, and now what are we getting is undefined is not a function. Render comment. There we go. So I was thinking of it like a class for a second. So this is the comment 1, 2, 3, and again, we're sort of we're using that application there of the map function to work with sort of that declarative data binding in that sense. Okay, so that's props for the for most of it. We can clean this up a little bit. Because it's being passed props, we can actually go ahead and destructure this, and we could say, hey, the parameters we expect are, we expect some comments, we expect children. Now I can clean this up and just say comments and children, and because we've destructured this, this should work the same way. Last thing that you're seeing here is this key property. This is for rendering with React and speeding things up. Say if we're sorting something, if we're using something like, if we're using this map, right, the map is also handed because it's a value index array. We could use this index and we could say key equals index. This isn't that great because it's not that unique in that sense. It's not going to complain about it anymore, and we can actually see this key in here. But in terms of how unique this is, etc., we can see key 0, right, key 1, and key 2. Let me see if I can see it. Key 2, right. That's alright, but it's not that unique. And again, if you're sorting or anything, it's going to be a lot slower in terms of the internal algorithms that are used on the back end to go ahead and re-render and reconcile with the virtual DOM with React. So we might have something more unique in that sense. We could change this to be, key is, something crazy, right? Whatever it might be. Let me just change this out. Whatever. Key, something like that. I'm just going to put 1, and then we'll just put name is tester for that comment. And now I can change this out to be comment dot name and comment dot key, right? Something like that. And now this should still work. But if we look again at the key, we've now applied, a more unique key, hopefully, than just what we had. All right, cool. So that's props for the most part. And again, you can sort of see everything is passed right there on construction. So let's look at state. So now we're going to go back to the class components a little bit. And with state, we're looking at things that can change throughout the life cycle of our application. So things that can change. So you can think of props more as constants for the most part, whereas state is things that can change, so it's things that are a little bit malleable. Okay, let's look at state. So we're going to just create, again, we'll create this comments component, and we'll extend the React component class. I'm going to build out this constructor, and basically I'm doing this. We can use 2 different ways to do this, and I could have state as an instance variable of the class. Go ahead and return the same sort of UI we had before. We'll just say div comments component, and let's render this out. Might get an error because I might need a transform for that state. Let's see. Let's make sure this refresh. Okay, come on. Okay, so let me make sure. Let's say test is 3, and then let's log out this state. Maybe because I updated my Create React app recently. Let's make sure. Okay, cool. So that works. So you can have state here. You could also create a constructor, which is part of a class. You could have the constructor taken props, which again is coming from that base class. We'll call it with the props that is being passed, and then we could say this.state. You can also define, other variables right here on the class itself, as opposed to, you can create static variables too. You could say static version, so we don't have to instantiate a new instance of that class. But most common convention is just to have the state in here. So again, I could say test is 3. And now if I go ahead and look at this, so state, it's just a JavaScript object. That's all it is. Cool. So, and again, you're either going to want to define it right here in this constructor, and again, maybe we want to look at the props and what they are, what we're actually getting passed. So let's look at this one more time and actually see. So it looks like what we're getting passed again is that comments array and the children. So here's a good example maybe where, although it's a bit of an anti-pattern in terms of creating your state with props, here's a good example of a place maybe we would want to inherit the comments. So I could say props.comments, and now if I look at the state, right, we're saying okay, state is this comments array. So this is good. because now we're free to update the comments without actually touching what came in terms of mutating the props, because that's an anti-pattern. So again, the only problem with this now is if this comments, if this prop, say this is coming from another component, it's just being passed down, ever changes, then we're going to have to tap into another lifecycle hook, which is component will receive props. We'll look at that a little bit, but yeah, sometimes this is necessary, to be honest, if you have like a default value. There are other ways to get around it using, centralized state management like Redux, but just sort of showing you a good example. So let's take this out again, and because we're not inheriting anything, and we'll just say state is comments, and I'm going to take this out of here, and I'm going to say, okay, now we just want to create our own state, right? And obviously, you would probably never hard code this, but just for the sake of this demo, let's go ahead and do that. So state is still this, and we're still getting the comments, but now we're free to sort of mutate this. Still, we're going to go about it with immutable methods like concat or slice or object.assign, whatever. But now we're free to sort of update this and have this change without relying on the props specifically. Most likely, though, state, what we would do is we would set this equal to an empty array, right? And then we would tap into this method right here, component did mount. We'll look at lifecycle in a little bit, but basically this method is going to be called on the React component, the component-based class, when we have access to the DOM. And this is a great place to do any AJAX requests, so fetching of any data. And again, this is only going to be called once. Only called once. And so we can sort of look at it, console log, component did mount, and sort of see, okay, it's being called again after the initial render, right? Or sort of close in parallel, but we're going to have access to the DOM there. So what we can actually do here, one other thing, you don't ever want to update your state in render, because when you call set state, it's going to render again, so you're going to enter an infinite loop. So I'm just going to make a little comment here, don't call set state in here directly. You can divert to another method, but don't call it in here, because this is, again, you're going to enter an infinite loop. Okay, so say here, I'm not going to do it specifically right now, but what we could do is update the comments right here. So I'm going to change, I'll just show you guys what I mean. So I'm going to grab the comments from state. I'm going to grab the comments from state. I'll say this.state. I'm destructuring there. I can look at what comments is. And let's look at this. Okay, so it's an empty array. And then what I want to do is I just want to set state, and I'll say comments equals this dot state dot comments, or actually I can just do this. I can do comments equals comments dot concat, and again we'll just say I'm just going to say key is something crazy like that, and name is tester. So now, and I'm just going to set state like that. Comments, now you can sort of see as it renders the second time, we're getting one comment, right? Cool. So let's look at this method right here. So set state is basically taking the current state we have and is going to merge in new updates or new state that we have. Again, you always want to call this method. Don't try and just update the state yourself and think you're good to go. Again, it's anti-pattern. You're mutating the object. You want to have that single source of truth, so that's why we have this set state method. So there's a few different signatures up here. I'm just going to show the most common. So this is this dot set state, and it takes in an object of basically this new sort of changed copy of state or updated copy that we want to merge into the current state. And then the second parameter, which is pretty useful and I actually use quite a lot, is a callback function that's going to be executed when these updates have been batched and everything has been enqueued, and we can be guaranteed we have a new copy of state. So let's look at this. We can say this dot state after update, and we'll just say this dot state. But let's look at this dot state, this state, I'm not sure, this dot state, and let's look at what's going to happen right here. This dot state not sure. So here's a good example, right? So although we're calling this, right, this is proving right here that the asynchronous method, we're not guaranteed to get back a fresh copy of of the updated state. So that's why it's good to tap into that method. And then again, we can look at so we have the comments here, but this isn't the sort of source of truth. So don't rely on that. Okay, so that's that for that life cycle. Let's look at a few of these methods. I'm just going to explain them briefly. We looked at the component did mount. We're going to look at component will mount a little bit. So basically the main difference between this is that you're not going to have guaranteed access to the DOM. So because it's not loaded, you're not going to get all of the sort of possibilities if you wanted to integrate with something else or you need to operate on DOM nodes, etc. Component will receive props. I'll just sort of define the method signature here. So it's will receive props, and it takes in some new props. Basically, we can look at what these new props are, make a comparison, and see if we need to update our component. And then finally, we have a should component update by default if we're just extending the regular component, and then we can look at should component update new props, and we can, I think the second parameter is the current props, or we can just look at this dot props. We can define these, do some sort of deep comparison if we need to do that, or shallow comparison, whatever it might be, and we can either return true or false from here. If we return true, we're saying, okay, we want to go ahead and update the component and trigger another render cycle. Otherwise, don't update, right? So I would say this, you don't tap into this too much. You can sort of optimize it. React is already super optimized when it comes to this in terms of like internally what's going on with its algorithms and diffing. But there's also another sort of component which is a pure component. This does not implement the should component update method, which means that this is like a one-way or sort of a one-time binding. So it's that. And let's see, component will receive props. We'll look at one more, which is the which one is it? Component will unmount. This is a great place to clean up your timers, any subscriptions to your store. Maybe you have a Redux subscription, whatever it is. Cleaning that up, just getting rid of other resources that you need to dispose of. Okay, so let's look at events. I might break this into 2 videos. I think this is just going to be part 1 for now. So I will come back with part 2 and we'll pick up with events. So we've gone through quite a bit of stuff right now. If you guys like the video, make sure to tell me in the comments and I will continue with part 2. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed it and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.